There's a very specific kind of problem every tennis tournament wants to have. One player suddenly becomes so popular that the stadium you booked for her is nowhere near big enough. And right now, the Cincinnati Open may be staring directly at that problem. Because just days after Alex Eala made history as the first Filipina to capture a WTA singles title, after a remarkable run that included victories over some of the biggest names in women's tennis and ended with world number 4 Jessica Pegula being handed a 6-0 final set, Cincinnati reportedly prepared to put Eala on a court that may not even hold half the crowd she just proved she can attract in Toronto. That's the part that has Filipino tennis fans shaking their heads. Cincinnati's marketing team has promoted Eala alongside stars like Aryna Sabalenka, Carlos Alcaraz, and Iga Swiatek. But if the reported order of play is accurate, the scheduling department may have treated her very differently. And one word is beginning to define the reaction from fans: regret. To understand why this is becoming such a big deal, rewind roughly 72 hours. Rain had pushed the Mubadala City DC Open final into Monday, and Eala walked off the court in Washington as champion after defeating Jessica Pegula 4-6, 6-4, 6-0. Think about that finish for a second. She closed out the world number 4 by winning 6 straight games in the deciding set of a WTA final. Almost nobody inside the stadium saw that coming. Eala barely had time to process the trophy before her schedule moved again. She had about one day between celebrating in Washington and getting on a flight to Toronto. She arrived tired, carrying a new career-high ranking around number 20, with her name suddenly appearing everywhere across the tennis world. Yet despite the exhaustion, something else was already happening. Fans were buying tickets. Toronto initially planned to put Eala on its grandstand court, which holds roughly 2,800 spectators. On paper, that probably sounded reasonable. You're looking at a player ranked around number 20, outside the top 15, so you give her a strong secondary court and move on. Except the fans didn't follow the spreadsheet. Tickets kept selling. Then they kept selling some more. By the time tournament officials understood what was happening, Eala was generating demand far beyond what that 2,800-seat venue could accommodate. Canadian Open tournament director Carl Hale suddenly had the kind of scheduling headache every promoter secretly dreams about. A player seated around number 20 pulling crowds normally associated with the biggest names in the sport. Toronto reacted quickly. Eala was moved to center court. Hale later explained publicly that demand for her match had climbed beyond 5,000 tickets before she had even struck her first ball. That matters because Cincinnati had a front-row seat to all of this. They didn't have to guess whether Eala could draw. Toronto was showing them in real time. And yet, according to the reported Cincinnati order of play, she was still being placed on a secondary show court for her opener. That is what makes the controversy so fascinating. Cincinnati itself has promoted Eala as a Philippine trailblazer backed by loud, passionate fans. The tournament clearly understands her story from a marketing standpoint. But if that reported court assignment holds, there is a major disconnect between how she is being advertised and how she is being scheduled. And the evidence supporting Eala's rise is piling up fast. In Washington, she beat Pegula 4-6, 6-4, 6-0 in the final. On her way through that tournament, the run included major names such as Zheng Qinwen, Leylah Fernandez, Alina Svitolina, Naomi Osaka, and Iga Swiatek. Against Swiatek, Eala survived a first-set tiebreak that stretched to 11-9. That isn't one lucky upset followed by an easy draw. That is a player repeatedly stepping onto the court against elite opposition and finding a way through. Then came the business side of the story. DC Open chairman Markine described the ticket demand surrounding Eala's Washington appearance as unprecedented. Not long after that, the same thing started happening in Canada. Carl Hale confirmed that his 2,800-seat grandstand wasn't large enough for the number of people who wanted to see Eala. Reports surrounding the Canadian tournament said her Wednesday night session became the event's first Wednesday night sellout in roughly 2 decades, with Serena Williams being associated with the previous comparable benchmark. That comparison should get everybody's attention. We are talking about a Filipino star generating ticket demand conversations that include Serena Williams. For Filipino tennis fans who have spent the past couple of years traveling, filling sections, waving flags, and turning road matches into what sometimes feels like home court territory, none of this is shocking. Those fans saw the momentum before tournament executives did. They were showing up in Miami. They packed Washington. They transformed Toronto into another massive display of Filipino support. The wider tennis business may only now be recognizing what those fans have been saying all along. And that is exactly why Cincinnati's reported decision feels so outdated. It looks like a schedule built around the version of Alex Eala from last season, when she withdrew from Cincinnati with a shoulder issue, rather than the version of Eala arriving now as a champion and one of the hottest ticket draws in women's tennis. Cincinnati already has enough pressure surrounding the event. Court conditions have faced criticism. Tournament leadership has had to publicly defend aspects of the event. Major renovation spending has raised expectations, while previous editions have also dealt with significant withdrawals, including players such as Jack Draper, Paula Badosa, Qinwen Zhang, Gregor Dimitrov, and Eala herself. So when another potentially avoidable issue appears, especially involving one of the hottest names in the sport, fans notice immediately. Just look at how quickly everything has changed. Monday, Eala wins the DC title. Wednesday, she is associated with Serena-level ticket demand history in Toronto. Then, heading into Cincinnati, she is reportedly scheduled on a smaller court. That compressed timeline is what makes the entire situation almost unbelievable. And we don't even have to guess what happens when a tournament realizes too late that Eala needs a bigger venue. Toronto already gave us the example. Carl Hale has been running one of the WTA Tour's flagship events for years. He didn't need to publicly explain a scheduling change, but he did. His tournament realized the grandstand could not physically accommodate the crowd Eala was attracting, so officials upgraded her court assignment. That isn't simply praise for Eala, it is hard evidence. A rival tournament director effectively demonstrated the exact problem Cincinnati could now face. When your venue has 2,800 seats and more than 5,000 people want tickets tied to the player appearing there, the math makes the decision for you. That's why Cincinnati cannot realistically say there were no warning signs. The warning was televised. It was discussed publicly. It was reflected in ticket sales. It was happening at another major North American tournament only days earlier. But this story is bigger than Cincinnati because professional tennis may now be adjusting to something it has rarely had before: a genuine Southeast Asian women's tennis superstar with enormous commercial support behind her. Every major tournament from Cincinnati through the Australian Open is going to face some version of the same question. Do you schedule Alex Eala strictly according to a ranking around number 20? Or do you also acknowledge that her ticket demand may dramatically outperform that ranking? Get the answer wrong and your supposedly secondary court could become the biggest scheduling story of the day. The US Open begins later in August, and Flushing Meadows could become the biggest test yet of Eala's drawing power. New York has far more courts, much larger crowds, and a global audience. What happens in Cincinnati could influence how tournament officials elsewhere evaluate her going forward. After that come events such as Wuhan and Beijing, followed by the rest of the season. Scheduling teams across the tour will be paying attention. If Cincinnati changes Eala's assignment before the situation becomes a problem, officials can simply say they responded to demand. But if they leave her on a smaller court and thousands of fans are unable to get in, the decision becomes a warning for every tournament that follows. There is also an incredible sporting transformation behind all of this. Go back 7 months to the 2026 Australian Open. Eala walked into her first Grand Slam main draw match against Alicia Parks and won the opening set 6-0. Then everything flipped. Parks began firing huge serves, finished with 12 aces, and won the next 2 sets 6-3, 6-2. Eala's Grand Slam debut ended quietly. Fast forward 7 months, and the picture could hardly look more different. Standing in Toronto after becoming the first Filipina WTA singles champion, Eala described the previous 24 hours as almost surreal. Her mind was bouncing between preparing for the next match and trying to process what she had just accomplished. That reaction tells you something important. This rise has happened so quickly that even Eala herself is still absorbing it. In January, she was learning painful lessons in Melbourne. By August, she was closing a WTA championship match by begeling the world number 4. 7 months. That is the timeline Cincinnati has to understand. If the reported schedule remains unchanged, they are not really scheduling the Alex Eala who exists today. They are scheduling yesterday's version of her, the promising player whose ranking and reputation had not yet caught up with what was coming. Because the numbers now tell another story. A 2,800-seat court versus demand exceeding 5,000 tickets. A Wednesday night sellout connected to a Serena Williams comparison. A 6-0 deciding set against the world number 4 in a championship match. And a rival tournament director who already showed exactly what to do when the assigned court suddenly becomes too small. That's why the next decision matters. So here's the question for you: if Cincinnati moves Alex Eala to center court before her second-round match, would you call that smart scheduling, vindication for her fans, or simple damage control? And if they don't move her at all, how far do you think she goes before the tournament has no choice but to upgrade her court? Put your prediction in the comments now and lock it in. Pick the round, pick the result, and if you've already filled out your Cincinnati bracket, tell us how deep you have Eala going. Because rankings can take time to catch up with reality. Ticket sales don't. And right now, Alex Eala's rise is moving faster than almost anybody in tennis expected.